17104.com. This is Zanetta Wingfield, and you're listening to The Voice 17104.com. The Voice 17104.com. Welcome to Did You Know? Podcast.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Greetings, my friends, and salutations. Welcome again to the Richard James Show. We like to deal with issues in Africa on our show, in addition to our African American heritage. And we got a treat today. We were able to acquire a couple of videos. They call them the Lumumbas. Okay, we have, first of all, historically, Patrice Lumumba, who was the first president of the Congo. Now, that was many, many, many years ago, and he also was assassinated after being president for only 7 days. Historically, he was, shall we say, a follower of Kwame Nkrumah, who instituted the whole concept of Pan-Africanism after studying Marcus Garvey. Now, we have a Professor Patrice Lumumba, who is a current, shall we say, scholar. He has, oh my God, he has numerous doctorate degrees. He's also an attorney, very articulate man, and he's going to speak on leadership within Africa. Let's just take a look back at an overview of what has happened on the continent of Africa, and it's things that we've talked about, but
What's up, people? It's your girl Adiola. How many Africans still remember the story of Patrice Lumumba? In fact, I will not be surprised that some Africans have never heard about Patrice Lumumba. In this era where African schools don't really teach African history, I mean, we learn more about the Queen of England when I was growing up in school than what happened in our own history. And in case you're wondering why you should care about what happened to this man, well, this man, Patrice Lumumba, by the age of 35, had impacted a legacy that so many of our present-day leaders in Africa can only dream of. And he has inspired so many people. And even though he's dead, he's still inspiring people. Recently, the country of Belgium returned the only remnant of Lumumba, his gold tooth. And they tendered some apology, which to me is not enough. I'll tell you why. But for you to understand the gravity of what Belgium did in the Congo, we have to go back in time. Before Belgium explorers arrived in the Congo, about 4 million Congolese people had been shipped out as slaves across the Atlantic Ocean to Brazil, to the US, and of course to the Caribbean. But in 1885, King Leopold II took over the country of Congo as his own personal property. That is something that I still cannot wrap my mind around. How anybody can decide that this new country, because of its natural resources and its beauty, is henceforth my personal property. How? We really need to talk about the Berlin Conference someday, when Africa was literally divided among colonialists as if Africa belonged to them. But even before then, even before the Berlin Conference, the US had recognized Belgium as the owner of the Congo. The country of Congo, by the way, is 77 times bigger than the country of Belgium. But because he had soldiers and they had guns, King Leopold, for 23 years, he unleashed the most brutal enslavement in Africa. King Leopold II forced the people of Congo to extract their own natural resources for him to build Belgium. They were not seen as human beings, by the way, the people of Congo. In fact, animals were treated better than them. At least 10 million Congolese people were massacred in the 23 years that King Leopold II was in charge of Congo. Many of them were flogged to death. And we're talking about in the 1800s, 10 million people. The population of Belgium today is 11 million, just to put it in perspective. Now, this is different from the millions of Congolese people whom he cut off their hands and their genitals, whom he starved, whom he held their children as ransom. In fact, he cut off the hands of so many children as well, and he burned down so many villages at a time, because anytime they failed to meet the quota of extracting rubber, among other things. If you see how advanced some Western countries are today, make sure that you also know their history, because many countries were built by Africa's natural resources. Now, the situation in Congo was so bad that there was a public outcry all over the world. There were reports of widespread murder, torture, and other abuses in the rubber plantations, and this led to international outcries against King Leopold II. And so the Belgian government took control of Congo from King Leopold, and they decided to make it a colony of Belgium instead of a country of slaves that are being treated anyhow. So in 1908, Congo became a colony of Belgium, which is also a sad joke, because you can't even compare the two countries population-wise, not to talk about how big, how vast Congo is compared to Belgium. Like I said, Congo is 77 times bigger than the country of Belgium. And as of that time, if the history statistics was anything to go by, the population of Belgium was about 2 million, and the population of Congo as of that time was more than 9 million, according to Statistica.com. And that is despite the fact that for 23 years before that, about 10 million Congolese people had been killed. But then, of course, Belgium had guns, and, you know, they had the army. And though they were now a colony of Belgium, Belgium still treated them as less equal.
Under Belgian rule, natives had virtually no political voice and had no rights to own land or travel around the country as they pleased. Although they could attend primary schools, the only other form of further education available to most natives was either in Catholic seminaries or the colonial army. Only in the year 1950, nearly half a century into the colonial era, were native Congolese permitted to attend the same secondary schools as the children of Belgian settlers.
Just imagine, this is your country. People came to your country and suddenly you are not human anymore. They were not even allowed to be educated beyond secondary school until about the 50s.
While natives were encouraged to train as clerks, traders, miners, and mechanics, they could not become doctors, lawyers, or architects. In sharp contrast to British colonial policy, which generally relied on a level of joint enterprise between natives and the colonial administration, the Belgian approach was aimed at ensuring complete dependence on Belgian manpower and expertise.
It was in the 50s, by the way, that we started knowing about Patrice Lumumba, who was part of the movement for independence in Congo. He was a poet, and many of his writings at that time had anti-imperialist themes, and so it caught the attention of the colonialists. He was also a journalist and a clerk at the post office. So as he became more and more popular with agitations for independence, the authorities wanted to keep him in his place. They wanted to teach him a lesson. So after a study tour in Belgium in 1956, he was accused of embezzling $2,500 from the post office where he worked. And so for that, he was jailed for 12 months. But instead of that keeping him down, that actually made him more determined and more committed to the cause of seeking for independence. He just totally kicked against anybody coming into his country and treating him like an animal. He was only 31 years old at that time, by the way. And then in 1958, when he was 33 years old, was when he founded his own party, the Movement National Congolese, MNC, focusing on independence, state-led economic development, and of course neutrality in foreign affairs. So all this, the fact that he's not dependent on Belgium, put him ahead of his contemporaries. There were other people agitating for independence as well, but they still wanted to be dependent on Belgium. But his philosophy was that Africans don't need to depend, and that they have everything they need to be self-sufficient. You guys remember we've talked about how blessed the Democratic Republic of Congo is, the natural resources, the vast rivers, and and everything that they have should make them even better than Dubai of today. So that same year, he attended the All-African People's Conference in Accra, Ghana, which was hosted by Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame really loved Patrice, by the way. He really admired him. And this is where his speech in Ghana inspired a lot of Africans of like-minded. And then a year later, Lumumba was arrested for inciting an anti-colonial riot in Stanleyville, Congo. 30 people were killed that time, and then he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. But you know, despite Lumumba being in prison, his party, the MNC, won a majority in the December local elections in the Congo. And as a result of strong pressure from delegates who are upset by Lumumba's trial, he was released and allowed to attend the Brussels conference, where it was decided that Congo would finally and formally become an independent country by June of that year, June 30th of 1960. And then on June 30th, 1960, Patrice became the first prime minister of Congo, and he gave a speech that the world did not forget.
Les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les voix honorables étaient réservées aux seuls blancs.
This man, at the age of 35, spoke with an apology about how his people had been treated by Belgium.
Nous avons connu que nos terres furent spoliées au nom des textes prétendument légaux qui ne faisaient que reconnaître les droits du plus fort. Nous avons connu que la loi n'était jamais la même, selon qu'il s'agissait d'un blanc ou d'un noir, accommodante pour les uns, cruelle et inhumaine pour les autres.
We'll definitely put the link to the full speech in the description below so you guys can watch it, but it was packed. That speech did not sit well with Belgium. Keep in mind, by the way, that his speech that day was in response to the speech given by King Baudouin. While he was granting them independence, he went on into praising King Leopold II, saying that he didn't come as a conqueror, but he came to civilize them.
L'indépendance du Congo constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II, entreprise par lui avec un courage tenace et continuée avec persévérance par la Belgique.
Il demande surtout de ne rien changer, si on n'est pas sûr de faire mieux.
Nobody criticized King Baudouin for what he had said. He said all these things, and the president, you know, they had the prime minister and they had the president. The president, when it was his turn, he just got up and thanked the king for his speech. But when it was time for Patrice to speak, he decided to say what was actually in the minds of so many of the Congolese people. He was not afraid of what could happen to him.
Les images ont été perdues, la voix est restée.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres.
But as expected, that speech did not sit well with Belgium. It didn't even sit well with the West, because according to history books, most European journalists that reported that speech, because you know it was televised, they were shocked by Lumumba's speech. And Western media criticized him instead of praising him for what he said. In fact, Time magazine at that time characterized his speech as a venomous attack. Many people feared that his speech was a call to arms, was going to incite Africans to start attacking them. One thing that Belgium and the US realized that day was that they would not be able to control Patrice Lumumba, and that he would not willingly give his country's natural resources to them. Now, when you have time, guys, try to read this article titled "The DRC and America's Nuclear Weapons," because throughout the 1940s and the 1950s, the Congo was actually #1 supplier of uranium to the US. In fact, 80% of the uranium that America used to build the nuclear bombs that were launched against Japan during the World War II in 1945, which made the US win, originated from the mines of Congo. So you can see how not just Belgium but the US also needed access to the resources of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Patrice became a stumbling block for them. which is why till today there are several debates about whether or not the US, the CIA, is involved in the killing of Patrice Lumumba or not.
2 months later, with the CIA, with White House approval, decreeing that he should be assassinated. Giving independence to an African colony was okay for them as long as it didn't disturb existing business arrangements, as long as the European country could continue to own the mines, the factories, the plantations.
Also, political science professor Stephen Weissman, who served on the staff of the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Africa from 1979 to 1991, had this to say.
Now, most Americans, and even many diplomatic historians, are not aware of what I'm going to discuss here, of the fact that there was a CIA role in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba.
And then, of course, he said that this was denied.
The Church Committee, a committee of the United States Senate, investigated this and determined Lumumba was killed by Congolese rivals. It does not appear from the evidence that the United States was in any way involved with the killing. But this is a mistake. The CIA station chief, Larry Devlin, participated along with the Belgian officials and Congolese on the CIA payroll, in the decision to transfer Lumumba to this secessionist state of Katanga.
Also keep in mind that Democracy Now! In 2011 interviewed a former CIA agent who had this to say about what happened.
CIA had developed a program to assassinate Lumumba. The operation didn't work. They didn't follow through on it. It was to give poison to Lumumba, and they couldn't find a setting in which to get the poison to him successfully in a way that it wouldn't appear to be a CIA operation. I mean, you couldn't invite him to a cocktail party and give him a drink and have him die a short time later, obviously.
And so it was not a surprise after he gave that speech that within 7 days of him becoming a prime minister, rebels sprung up in different parts of the country wanting to take power from Patrice. And then Belgium said that they were going to help him to stop the rebels. But guess what Belgium did? They brought in soldiers to work with the rebels so that they could overthrow Patrice. So Patrice asked for help from the United Nations, and they said no. And so guess what he did? He turned to the Soviet Union, enemies of Belgium, enemies of the US. You know, the understanding was if the Soviet Union should help Patrice, they may now have access to the uranium to build nuclear weapons, which the other parties don't want. And so the US and Belgium allegedly sponsored to get rid of Patrice Lumumba.
They handled it by the chief of station talking to Mobutu about the threat that Lumumba posed, and Mobutu going out and killing Lumumba, having his men kill Lumumba.
And did I mention that Patrice had a personal assistant by the name Mobutu Sese Seko? Mobutu Sese Seko used to be close to Patrice Lumumba. He used to be in the army, and he used to be an informant for the Belgians. And also he used to be a journalist. It breaks my heart because, to be honest with you, the summary of Patrice Lumumba's story is that we Africans are our own problem. There was nothing outsiders could do if there was no one inside willing to compromise. It's so unfortunate that someone that was close to him became the person that was used against him. And guess what? It's still happening today. We have never been united. If we were united, we wouldn't be where we are. If the people of Congo were united, first of all, there wouldn't be any uprising by any rebels in the first place. And if only Mobutu Sese Seko was not a sellout, Patrice Lumumba may still be alive today. We don't know. But by now, Patrice had trusted Mobutu so much so that when he became the prime minister, he gave Mobutu Sese Seko the office of the Secretary of State to the presidency. And then when the rebels started agitating in different parts of the country and the Belgium sided with the rebels, Patrice fired the Belgian military officers. And he made his confidant, Mobutu Sese Seko, the chief of staff of the army.
By aligning himself to American and Belgian interests, Mobutu realized that he could use their military might to consolidate power for himself and create a perfectly symbiotic relationship between him and two of the world's most powerful countries.
Someday we'll talk about Mobutu. Patrice had no idea that by making him the head of the army, he just gave him the resources he needed to overthrow him.
Acting in collaboration with President Kasavubu, the Belgians and the Americans, Mobutu would go on to arrange for the capture and secret execution of the very same man that had brought him to the corridors of power.
And I think I should let you guys know that he was 31 years old at that time when he decided to betray Patrice, when he decided to betray his own country for greed, for Belgium. And so he had him arrested.
Following his capture by crack commandos of strongman Colonel Mobutu, taken to Mobutu's headquarters past a jeering, threatening crowd, Lumumba was impassive at this lowest ebb of his stormy career. Mobutu watched as his troops manhandled Lumumba, but promised the pro-red Lumumba a fair trial.
And of course, after torturing Patrice and his men that were arrested with him, he had the firing squad shoot them, and their bodies were thrown into a shallow grave. But of course, the following morning, they decided to make the bodies disappear, and they wanted to prevent a burial site from being created so that people would not be going there. And so Belgian officer Gerard Soete and his team dug up and dismembered their bodies and dissolved their bodies in sulfuric acid while their bones were grounded and scattered. The only thing that remained of Patrice Lumumba was his gold tooth. And that officer took it to Belgium, where it has been for the last 61 years.
On the 21st of January, they dismembered the corpses and dissolved them in sulfuric acid, secretly saving 2 teeth from Lumumba's body as a trophy.
And that's what was now returned. So Patrice could finally get a befitting burial in his own country. And that's why I said, personally, I don't think that it's enough to say we're sorry. I mean, with all that they did, Congo has not recovered from what the Belgians did. And Mobutu went on to be one of the worst dictators in Africa for 3 decades. And even now, Congo has not gotten on its feet. You know, I think that there should be some kind of repatriation for the damage done in Congo, for taking democracy from them. Although I will not suggest giving money or anything to African leaders as repatriation, because it would not get to the people. They would, you know, steal it, embezzle it. Let me know what you guys think to compensate the people of Congo for killing their hope. So the funny thing is, Belgium has expressed regrets, but the US has not said anything or even acknowledged its role, whether or not it was involved in the killing of Patrice Lumumba. Let me know what you guys think about that. But more importantly, if you notice, I kept stressing his age and Mobutu's age when they both made history. And it's because I want to encourage us, young people of Africa today, that we've become complacent. We need to wake up. We don't even know the power that we have. A lot of people that made impact in their time, they were young. We are leaving all the decision-making about our continent in the hands of older men, many of whom do not care about our countries. Many of our presidents today in Africa still enjoy being puppets in the hands of France, for example. We have 20-something-year-olds, 30-something-year-olds that are medical doctors, engineers, inventors, doing amazing things. You know, that's your prime age, 40s, 50s. When would we step into steering the affairs of our countries as well in our prime age? If Patrice could touch the world at 35, if Thomas Sankara was only 37 when he was killed, I made a video about his life, his exploits, and the things that he did in the short time that he was head of state. We'll put that link in the description below. But if they could do all that, what are we doing with our time? Because someday we'll also become history, and people will talk about what we did or what we did not do. May the soul of Patrice rest in peace. He was indeed a father of democracy in Africa. You guys now don't know much. Guess what? I'm just keeping it real.
Wow, that was quite a dynamic video. Let's just say this. This happened several decades ago, and we have had administrations that have been very much pro-African. So I just want to do the flip side of that, and also have poured millions of dollars into Africa in terms of healthcare, economy, and that's happening. So we know that's happening. We have, and there are other nations that America is competing with this, also investing in Africa. So that happened. It's terrible. It cannot be erased. But good news is that we have had our leadership that have been that has changed, and this is a different era. So this is not necessarily the same. George Bush did some things in Africa. Barack Obama had a very intense program in helping and supporting Africa. So let's move on. Now we have a professor by the name of Patrice Lumumba, who was a doctor, who was a lawyer, and we're going to hear some things from him in his presentation. The video is coming up now. The leadership, African leadership.
My younger days, I would have been more prescriptive. I would have pontificated, but as I grow old, I know, number one, that I do not have monopoly of wisdom. And what I do is to share my thoughts with you and to make suggestions which may not necessarily be true, but they constitute my opinion on the subject at hand. And that is exactly what I intend to do on a subject on which I do not claim expertise. What I have done is to prepare a paper which will be circulated, and I've prepared it in two forms, in the PowerPoint form and in the Word form. I will speak to the paper without reading the paper, and in that way, I believe we'll interact a lot more. And my paper is entitled, The Vision of the Founding Fathers, Looking to the Past to Inform the Future. And I will be alive to the fact that the element of religion is at the heart of the theme that is being interrogated this afternoon. When I was thinking about the paper, the first question that I asked, who are the founding fathers, or who are the founding fathers that the framers and organizers of this conference had in mind? And I was convinced that they must have had in mind some of the key figures that were present in the 1940s and 1950s and 1990s up to 1980s, and indeed up to the 1990s, who participated in the liberation of Africa. But yet, even as I thought so, I was conscious of the fact that when one examines history, particularly the history of the black people, there are a number of individuals who are founding fathers, but are rarely mentioned when we talk about Africa. One of the individuals who came to my mind is a great South African about whom we say very little, Patrice Lumumba. The South Africans in this assembly will be aware of that great South African who was one of the founders of the African National Congress. And if they care to examine some of his early works, they will also be familiar with one of the greatest speeches ever delivered by an African, delivered at the University of Columbia in the month of April 1906, titled The Regeneration of Africa. Those who have had the privilege and honor of examining that piece of writing acknowledge that Patrice Lumumba was very conscious of the status of Africa as it was in those days. You will remember that by 1906, Africa had suffered the fate of partition in Berlin, and that it had been partitioned, as we know, amongst the European powers. Prominently, the Germans had their share in West Africa. They had their presence here in Rwanda and Burundi. They were present in what was then Tanganyika. The French were present. The Portuguese were present, the English were present, the Belgians were present, the Spaniards were present, the Arabs were present, although they were not part of the club that partitioned Africa in 1884. And therefore, when he was talking about the whole idea of the regeneration of Africa, the choice of his words, because he was speaking in a foreign tongue, which I am speaking in this afternoon, the words that he chose, he talked about the regeneration of Africa. And when one talks about regeneration, it means that there was an Africa which had a certain level of development and that had suffered at the hand of the foreigners, and therefore it needed to be regenerated. Those of you who are familiar with the thoughts and works of Senegal's Anta Cheikh Diop will know that Anta Cheikh Diop does recognize that there was indeed an Africa which had certain levels of civilization. In fact, the more romantic historians suggest that when Europe and Europeans were still living in the caves in the western part of Africa, there were organized kingdoms and that there were libraries which rival the largest libraries in Africa today. Indeed, those of you who are students of religion like Professor here will know that people like Augustine of Hippo or Athanasius, some of the early thinkers in religion, were resident in what may today be called the Maghreb. In other words, therefore, when Patrice Lumumba was speaking in 1906, and he was talking about the regeneration of Africa, he was telling us that Africa needs to rediscover herself and that Africa needs to move a notch higher in order to find her pride of place amongst the community of nations. It is instructive, therefore, that the works and the ideas of Pixley Kaisa Kaseme were to be picked and developed a little later in time by other great African thinkers, yet one who is seldom mentioned, James Emmons Kwejiri of Ghana, normally referred to as Agri of Africa. Many of you, particularly the Ghanaians who are here, will remember that James Emmons Kwejiri was the first Ghanaian to earn a PhD and one of the early African leaders of the famous Achimota College in Accra, Ghana. And James Emmons Kwejiri was indeed very clear in his mind. The story is told of James Emmons Kwejiri, which I'll relate to you now that I have more time than was allotted to me. And the story is one that has been told by different people in different ways, but even if I retell it in the manner which offends the original story, my point will still be made. The point is this. He said, and he remembers as a teacher, that at one time there was a poultry farmer. And he says that this poultry farmer could only keep one thing, because when you're a poultry farmer, you only keep chicken. But he remembers that at one time, some of his chicken that he was keeping strayed into the bush. And when they came back home, there was within their ranks another chick which did not look like them. It was the chick of an eagle. And one day, after a passage of time, a naturalist came to the farmer and saw the eagle in all its splendor. And he said, "This is not chicken, this is an eagle." But the farmer said, "I know. It was once an eagle, but it has been fed on chicken feed for too long. It has long lost its chickenhood. It has long lost its eaglehood. It has now acquired chickenhood." And the poultry farmer and the naturalist said, "No, once an eagle, always an eagle, no matter how long you are fed on chicken feed." And the naturalist said, the farmer said, "I want you to demonstrate." And in the evening, he put the chick on his palm and urged it to fly, but it refused to fly. And the story is told, the farmer said, "I told you, It was once an eagle. It was fed on chicken feed. It has lost its eaglehood. It is now a chicken. But then the following day, the naturalist came early in the morning, and as the sun was rising, he put the chick on the palm of his hands and urged it on, and it flew and never came back again. And he said, I told you, once an eagle, even if you feed it on chicken feed, it will remain an eagle. And he said so animatedly, it is reported, that is who an African is. He could have been fed on chicken feed, but it has never lost its eaglehood. James M. and Kweji Ragri was underlining the fact that no matter how devastated you are, you will always have that inner self. And I think the person who captured it in order to lay the basis of this as an artist is a man that we call Wole Soyinka. The many of you who are Nigerians here will remember Wole Soyinka's famous writing, "The man died, the man died, the man died, the man in you must never die," and the man includes the woman. And I'm laying this basis for us to understand that when we talk about forefathers, we must never forget individuals such as Patrice Lumumba. We must never forget people like James M. and Kweji Ragri. We must not forget people like Cheikh Anta Diop. And if we want to go into the diaspora, we must never forget individuals such as Marcus Garvey of Jamaica. And we must never forget individuals such as W.B. Du Bois. And one of the things that they underscored in those early days, before I come to the forefathers that we are much more familiar with, is that Patrice Lumumba, in his writing and his speech, which I've already talked about, he said, in order for Africa to realize our potential amongst the Committee of Nations, there is only one thing that must define African relationship with other civilizations. He called it multi-dimensional osmosis. And what he called multi-dimensional osmosis becomes much more relevant, particularly today, when we are trading with China, when the osmosis is not multi-dimensional. And the osmotic is only in one direction, is monodirectional. And what he meant at that time is that Africans must engage with other civilizations, but that engagement must be of such a nature that it is mutually beneficial and the relationship is symbiotic. And I think that that is what we want to underscore today, even as we talk about religion and the place of religion in giving pride of place to self-governance and religious freedom as an important pillar in one of the 7 pillars of Africa Agenda 2063. But yet I cannot at this stage yet go into Africa Agenda 2063 before I examine what was the vision of our founding fathers and my own examination, and I stand to be corrected on this. Whenever we talk about the founding fathers of Africa, we are normally directed to remember the 32 leaders who gathered in the month of May 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I encourage us to look at the views of these individuals, but even before we go to that particular period, to look at some of the early thoughts and some of the things that animated these individuals to the extent that we now call them the founding fathers, and what it is that they had in mind that defined them as the founding fathers. And I take us back to 1957 in Accra, Ghana, on the day that the country then known as Gold Coast regained her political independence. And see how deliberate I am. I'm saying the country regained her political independence, did not acquire her independence. She regained an independence that she had lost by dint of force and by dint of both strategy and stratagem. In 1957, on the day of the regaining of the independence by Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah was as passionate as he was eloquent. He said that the independence of Ghana meant nothing unless all the other African countries were independent. And what did independence mean? Because at that time, and you will give me a little latitude in order to give some flavor to my presentation. If you look at the individuals who are present at that time in terms of the commonality and the unanimity of their vision, one had to look at Africa and understand what it is that they were talking about. In West Africa, if you listened at that time to Kwame Nkrumah, his clarity of vision is that independence and liberty meant a number of things. One, the liberty of the individual as individuals to exercise their thoughts and to be free to participate in their affairs, including religion as I understand it, and that therefore Kwame was conscious that the country that he had participated in liberating, which was Christian Gold Coast, but he rechristened and the people rechristened Ghana, was a multi-ethnic country and a multi-religious country and a country that was rich in her diversity. And the same was true of every other country. So that if you listened at that time in next door to in Nigeria, which was, as you know, until independence divided into 3 regions, the northern region, the eastern region, and the western region, you could see that even at that time in Nigeria, while the colonialist was conscious of the religious differences, the leaders of the day, even if grudgingly so, were conscious of the fact that now that they had found themselves in this geographical space, they had to tolerate each other. So that when you are listening to the Muslims in the north, when you are listening to Abubakar Tafawa Balewa in Nigeria, or the Saudaner of Sokoto, Sah Ahmadu Bello, and listening to Namdi Azikiwe, who is a Christian, they are conscious of their diversity. They are grudgingly in Nigeria, but they accept the fact that they must live together. Religion and religious differences was not given the pronouncement and the accent that we now see in the manner that I shall demonstrate when I am concluding my presentation. So that even if you left countries that had that kind of diversity and you went to Algeria and you listened to the more casual thoughts of Algeria's Ahmed Ben Bella, you could see that he was conscious of the fact that even though we were finding ourselves in potential religious conflict, we had a common vision for Africa. And in that regard, you would listen in Liberia, or rather in Algeria, to Ahmed Ben Bella. You would go down to Guinea to Ahmed Sékou Touré. You would go to Egypt to Gamal Abdel Nasser, leading an Egypt that was fundamentally Muslim, but conscious of the fact that there was an Africanness. But there were also other individuals who at that time did not believe that God existed. They were persuaded that there was something called materialism, that they were persuaded by a different ideology. But even in that appreciation, they were conscious of one fact, that there was a continent called Africa, and that Africa was a continent that needed to move in one direction. And you will discover such individuals when you come to Kenya, when you come to Tanzania. We talk about people who are Christians, committed Christians, such as Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and you went down to the people who did not quite believe in Southern Africa, like Agostino Neto or Samora Moses Machel at that time. But what is critical for our presentation is that in May 1963, 32 leaders congregate in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the invitation of Emperor Haile Selassie. And I invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to take time this evening or hereafter to read the speeches that were delivered by each one of them. And I've read each one of them several times. Even the ones who later disappointed us, the Spirit was on them. The Spirit was on them. And I will only isolate a few of them in order for us to appreciate how far they could see. As I stand here, I remember the speech of David Dacko of Central African Republic. He says that Africa must unite and move in one direction, for how would a little country such as Central African Republic survive in the face of the sustained machinations of the erstwhile colonial power? We know that David Dacko did not live up to the dreams that we thought he would. I listened to speeches such as those of Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania. He said, we did not come here to talk about unity or to remind ourselves how unity is important. We have come here to affirm the fact that without unity, Africa is never going to realize their potential. And one can go on to the speeches of Modibo and others and Haile Selassie and others, but it's not important to rehash those speeches because they can be located in libraries. But it's important to isolate one speech, the speech of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, because that, for those of you who are French speakers, that was the pièce de résistance. It was the speech that, in my view, captured the essence of what was meant to be Africa. And the three things that stand out in the speech and therefore form the three-legged stool upon which my presentation will now be founded. He said that Africa must unite and unite immediately before the leaders who are present in that forum become used to the trappings of power. You and me know that they have now become victims of the trappings. He said that we must unite and come out of that arrangement with one army, with one currency, with one united country, because the former colonial powers had yet devised another method of controlling African. And he said that that thing which we later examined and recognized as neocolonialism was alive and well. And he said, if we did not do so, Africa will never realize our potential. That is the Africa about which you want me to reminisce in order for me to determine what was the vision of the founding fathers. Their vision was a united Africa. Their vision was an Africa that was united in our diversity. Their vision was an Africa that would tell her story. Their vision was an Africa that would exploit our resources for our benefit. Their vision was an Africa that would sit at the dinner table of human civilization, not as food to be consumed or as a waiter, but as a diner to enjoy the goodies of life. That was their vision. But the question is, that vision that saw Africa liberate herself from the clutches of colonialism, was it merely flag independence, as Kenya's Ngugi wa Thiong'o says, not in so many words, in his book, Decolonizing the Mind? Was it a total liberation of the peoples of Africa? In his famous television program, Kenya's Ali Mazrui, the program titled Africa, a Triple Heritage, Ali Mazrui says passionately and eloquently at once that Africa is the only continent on earth that consumes that which it does not produce and produces that which it does not consume. And he says, curiously, we are the only continent on earth that is still referred to in the following derogatory terms: Anglophone Africa, Francophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, and those who are generous even refer to some part of Africa as Arabophone Africa. He says they do not say that of Latin America, they do not say that of Asia. And if
all right, we're coming down near the end of our show, but that was a brilliant presentation by Lumumba. That was a brilliant presentation by our female host. we talked about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. But it was a common thread that you heard, and that was one of unity and bringing folks together. Is critically important, particularly in the African American community, that we believe in ourselves and that we love ourselves and we learn to love each other. Uh, Personally, I think we live in a diverse world, and the world is going to remain diverse. We cannot separate ourselves and put ourselves into a corner and really expect to be able to deal in a multiracial society. Say that again. I believe in nationalism. I believe in coming together. I believe in unity. I do not believe going off into a corner away from somebody else, away for other people, and live that way. We need love. We need unity. We need to come together as one in order to make things better for not only ourselves, but for all people. Because humanity began in Africa, but it didn't stop there. Spread throughout the world. Now we have multi-racial societies all over the world, and we need to draw all of them in and make sure that people as a whole are taken care of, and that we shouldn't divide the so-called elite from the so-called poor. Everybody has to be taken care of. It's a really critical thing. Come see me down in Lebanon at 35 8th Street and the Lebanon Valley Farmers Market currently. And we have a multiple array of clothes, a multi-array of statues, of oils, and that kind of thing. And everybody is welcome. You come on and enjoy what we have to share with you. And we try to give a brief education on where the artifacts came from, who created them, who created the statues, who created the clothing, because we want you to know about people. We want you to know about people and learn to love all people. These are some of the things, the pictures that you're seeing, that we come from African people throughout the world, from Palau, from Indonesia, from Senegal, from Ghana, from Ethiopia. Come and here's a picture of the Reverend Dr. Gaskin and myself at the beautiful Black History program that he had, bringing people together, unity. These are some of the things that we have, drums, we have African clothing. So come out and share and talk to us and communicate with us, and we'll be so pleased to see you. So we're signing off. Thanks again for coming again and visiting with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. We want to thank the continued support of the Thomases and putting this venue together that we can use to communicate with you. Because once you know what has happened in the past, you know what to do in the future. God bless and so long. Take care now. Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.